Russian history has its share of sudden, suspicious deaths, but few were as politically convenient as the demise of Emperor Peter III. He ruled the largest empire on Earth for just 186 days. His reign wasn't ended by war or rebellion, but in the quiet of a country estate. 8 days after being overthrown in a coup led by his own wife, Peter was dead. The official story presented to a skeptical court was almost comically bland. The emperor, they claimed, had succumbed to a severe attack of hemorrhoidal colic and an apoplectic stroke. It was an explanation so bizarrely specific that almost no one believed it. As the official ink was drying, whispers filled the halls of the Winter Palace, whispers of a drunken brawl, a desperate fight, and a silk scarf pulled tight around a royal neck. It's a story of a deeply flawed ruler and his ruthlessly ambitious wife, a German princess who would become one of history's most formidable women, Catherine the Great. So, how does an emperor get erased from the picture so quickly? Well, you have to look at the man himself. A man who seemed so spectacularly unfit for the throne, he all but invited his own destruction. This is the story of how a strange medical excuse was likely used to cover up an assassination, one that secured a crown and forever shrouded Catherine the Great's legacy in suspicion. The story of this Russian tragedy doesn't start in Russia at all. It begins in Kiel, a city in the German duchy of Holstein-Gottorp. This is where a boy named Karl Peter Ulrich was born in 1728. He wasn't Russian by birth, language, or temperament. He was a German prince with a tangled lineage, grandson of Peter the Great of Russia on one side and related to the King of Sweden on the other. His childhood was miserable. Orphaned young, he was raised in the Swedish court where his tutors found him difficult and insecure. His real passion wasn't for governing, but for all things military, specifically all things Prussian. He worshipped Prussia's king, Frederick the Great, who just so happened to be one of Russia's greatest enemies. While other princes studied statecraft, Peter drilled his servants and played with toy soldiers, a habit he infamously carried into his adult life and even the marital bedroom. He was, in many ways, a child in a man's body, ill-suited for any real power. His fate was sealed when his aunt, the childless Empress Elizabeth of Russia, summoned him to St. Petersburg and named him her heir. Renamed Pyotr Fyodorovich, he was thrown into a world he openly hated. He struggled with the Russian language, despised the Orthodox faith, and complained that the Russian people would never accept him. To secure his position, Empress Elizabeth arranged his marriage to another German noble, Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst. Upon converting to Russian Orthodoxy, she took a new name, Yekaterina, or Catherine. The marriage was a catastrophe from the start. Catherine was intelligent and politically savvy. Peter was infantile, cruel, and often drunk. He humiliated Catherine publicly while flaunting his affairs. Their union was reportedly unconsummated for years, and the legitimacy of their son, Paul, was questioned by many, including, in her memoirs, Catherine herself. While Peter lost himself in military fantasies, Catherine was doing something far more dangerous. She was learning. She mastered Russian, devoutly embraced orthodoxy, and began making powerful friends in the court and, crucially, in the elite imperial guards. She was playing the long game, patiently waiting while her husband did everything possible to make himself hated. On January 5, 1762, Empress Elizabeth died, and the man-child who idolized Prussia became Peter III, Emperor of all Russia. The court held its breath, hoping the crown might instill some sense of duty. Those hopes were shattered. Peter launched a series of reforms and foreign policy reversals, so out of touch with Russian interests, they seemed almost designed to provoke a rebellion. His 6-month reign was a masterclass in how to lose an empire. His most infamous act was to unilaterally pull Russia out of the 7 Years' War. Russian armies had fought for years, pushing Frederick the Great's Prussia to the verge of collapse. With victory in sight, Peter didn't just make peace, he gave everything back. He returned all conquered lands to Prussia without any concessions, and then offered his troops to his hero, Frederick, to fight against Russia's former allies. Overnight, Russia went from Prussia's enemy to its ally. The Russian military, which had sacrificed so much, saw this as an unforgivable betrayal. While some of his domestic reforms, like abolishing the secret police and proclaiming religious freedom, are viewed by modern historians as surprisingly progressive, they were completely overshadowed by his disastrous foreign policy and personal conduct. He turned on the powerful Russian Orthodox Church, planning to seize its lands and force priests to shave their beards and dress like Protestant pastors. He angered the army by trying to remodel it on the Prussian system, forcing them into the stark blue uniforms of their former enemy and replacing prestigious Russian Guard units with his own Holstein troops. His personal behavior sealed his fate. He was erratic, often drunk in public, and subjected his generals to humiliating military drills, treating the court like his personal parade ground. He planned an unpopular war against Denmark, not for any Russian interest, but to settle a personal dispute over his German duchy. Within 6 months, Peter III had infuriated every powerful group in the empire: the military, the nobility, and the church. He was a national embarrassment. As he made enemies, his wife, Catherine, watched, waited, and gathered her allies. The stage was set for a coup. Every time Peter's popularity took a nosedive, Catherine's seemed to rise. While the emperor alienated the court with his pro-Prussian fanaticism, the empress presented herself as a model of piety and Russian patriotism. Her transformation from an obscure German princess into the woman who would be called Catherine the Great was a lesson in political maneuvering. She had spent nearly 2 decades in the Russian court observing its power dynamics. Unlike her husband, she immersed herself in Russian culture, becoming fluent in the language and a devout member of the Orthodox Church. She read the great Enlightenment thinkers and cultivated an image as an intelligent ruler in waiting. She understood that in Russia, power flowed from the loyalty of the imperial guards, the elite regiments with a history of making and unmaking czars. Her most critical alliance was with the Orlov brothers. At the center was Grigory Orlov, a charismatic artillery officer who became Catherine's lover. He and his 4 brothers were influential figures within the guards. The most formidable was Alexei Orlov, a giant of a man known for his brute strength and utter ruthlessness. The Orlovs turned the military's resentment into a revolutionary force. The conspiracy grew, pulling in powerful figures like senior statesman Nikita Panin and the well-connected Princess Yekaterina Dashkova. They all believed Peter was leading Russia to ruin and that Catherine was the only one who could save it. Some historians argue Catherine was also driven by fear that Peter planned to divorce and imprison her. Whatever her primary motive, self-preservation or pure ambition, she acted with precision. While Peter was busy planning his war with Denmark, completely unaware of the plot brewing, Catherine and her allies were finalizing their plans. She wasn't just a part of this plot, she was its heart, an empress in waiting, ready to seize the power her husband had so foolishly thrown away. The conspiracy was ready to ignite, but the spark came sooner than expected. On the night of July 8, 1762, word came that a co-conspirator had been arrested. The plot was exposed. To hesitate now meant certain execution. They had to act immediately. While Peter was at his palace in Oranienbaum, distracted by a hangover, history was being made in St. Petersburg. In the pre-dawn hours, Alexei Orlov raced to Catherine, waking her with the words, "It is time to arise. All is prepared for your proclamation." They sped towards the capital, arriving at the barracks of the Ismailovsky Guards. In a dramatic speech, Catherine begged the soldiers to protect her, claiming her husband threatened her life. Fired up by the Orloffs, they swore allegiance. From there, it was a domino effect. Regiment by regiment, the guards joined her. She went to the Kazan Cathedral, where an allied archbishop proclaimed her Catherine II, Empress of all Russia. By morning, Catherine, dressed in the uniform of a male guardsman, stood at the head of 14,000 soldiers, the master of the capital. Frederick the Great later remarked that Peter allowed himself to be dethroned like a child being sent to bed. Peter remained blissfully ignorant for hours. When he finally arrived at the Peterhof Palace for his celebration, he found it empty. Panic set in. He dithered, first considering fleeing to the army, then sailing to the naval base at Kronstadt. He chose Kronstadt, but it was too late. The fortress had already declared for Catherine. His will to fight evaporated. Surrounded by Catherine's forces, Peter signed a formal abdication. He was arrested and, under the guard of Alexei Orlov, taken to a remote estate called Ropsha. Catherine was now the sole ruler of Russia, but one loose end remained. A living deposed emperor is always a threat. With the crown secured, Catherine faced the classic problem. What to do with the deposed monarch? A living Peter III was a potential rallying point for rebellion. She initially planned to imprison him, but he never made it to a cell. For 8 days, he was a prisoner at the Ropsha estate, under the menacing watch of Alexei Orlov. Then, on July 17th, it was over. A frantic, nearly incoherent letter arrived for Catherine from Alexei Orlov. The note claimed a tragedy had occurred. At dinner, Peter had started a fight with one of the guards. Before they could be separated, Orlov wrote, "He was dead. We ourselves know not what we did." Was it really a drunken scuffle that got out of hand, or was that just a cover story? The official autopsy blamed a severe case of hemorrhoidal colic and an apoplectic stroke, a diagnosis so conveniently nonviolent that almost no one then or now believed it. The most widely accepted story, though unproven, is that he was assassinated. After a clumsy attempt to suffocate him failed, his captors, likely led by Alexei Orlov, strangled him with a silk scarf. So, the big question, did Catherine order the hit? There's no smoking gun, no signed order. Many historians believe she may have only intended to imprison him, but it's hard to imagine she was entirely innocent. She was a masterful political operator who knew the threat a living Peter posed. By placing him in the custody of the ruthless Alexei Orlov, a man who hated Peter and had everything to gain from Catherine's security, she at the very least created the perfect conditions for murder. Whether Orlov acted on his own, believing he was carrying out the Empress's unspoken will, or received a quiet command, the result was the same. The problem of Peter III was solved. Catherine's public reaction was one of performative grief. She issued a proclamation mourning her husband's unexpected death. His body was briefly displayed, not in royal regalia, but in the blue uniform of a Holstein officer, a final reminder of his foreignness. He was buried without honors in the Alexander Nevsky Monastery, far from the traditional tomb of the tsars. Years later, their son, Paul I, who despised his mother and believed she was complicit in his father's murder, would have his revenge. He had Peter's remains exhumed and reburied with full imperial honors right next to Catherine in the Peter and Paul Cathedral. In a final, chilling act, he forced the now elderly Alexei Orlov to march in the funeral procession, carrying the imperial crown before the coffin of the man he was widely believed to have murdered. The suspicion that she was a regicide, a wife who had overthrown and likely killed her husband, cast a long shadow over Catherine's 34-year reign. It fueled rebellions led by impostors claiming to be a miraculously escaped Peter III, most famously the Cossack Yemelyan Pugachev, whose uprising shook her empire to its core. What really happened at Ropsha remains one of Russia's great historical mysteries. Was it an accident, an illness, or a cold-blooded assassination? While proof of Catherine's direct order is lost to time, the circumstances speak volumes. An unpopular emperor was overthrown by his ambitious wife, placed in the care of her most ruthless allies, and 8 days later was dead from a suspiciously convenient ailment. Catherine the Great was, above all, a victor, and the story of her husband's demise became her story to tell, a carefully built narrative that secured her throne and her legacy as one of the most powerful and enigmatic rulers in history. What do you think? Did Catherine give the order, or did her guards take matters into their own hands? Let us know in the comments below. And for more stories about history's most formidable rulers, make sure to subscribe.